Okay, so we are planning on learning the hemshekh of Ranat. The hemshekh of Ranat was conceived of in the summer of Tov Reish Nun Ches. So the Frierdiker Rebbe writes how when the Rebbe Rashab was away from the Lubavitch, that summer he was very deep in thought, and he revealed to him that he was preparing, he was thinking through the hemshekh of Ranat. And the way a hemshekh works is, say this hemshekh, for example, is based on a maimer, or one maimer of the Tzemach Tzedek, which is printed in Eirat Devarim Chelik Vav, and it's loosely based on the flow of that maimer, but it has a lot more, longer, a lot more elaboration. And the hemshekh would have been written before Rosh Hashanah. So the Rebbe Rashab would have started writing the maimer from starting Yom Tov Shel Rosh Hashanah as if it was one maimer. Would write the whole thing all the way to the end, and then realizing that it's way too long to be one maimer. It requires to be chopped up into sections. So it was divided into 8 sections. So you have 8 maimorim in the hemshekh, and in fact, the maimer that it's based on only really starts after the first paragraph. The first paragraph seems to be an addition of the Rebbe Rashab, because that year in Ranat, Rosh Hashanah fell out on Shabbos. So he started the hemshekh with a discussion about the Mishnah of Yom Tov, the Yom Tov Rosh Hashanah falling on Shabbos, about the blowing the shofar. But he never goes back to the questions he asks here at the beginning, and it doesn't seem to be so relevant. We talk about the shofar again in the third maimer, but not in relation to the discussion we have over here. So in a sense, we have 2 introductions. We have the introduction regarding Yom Tov Rosh Hashanah that falls on Shabbos. Then we have the introduction, which fits in with the maimer, the Tzemach Tzedek, and then we get into it. The hemshekh of 8 maimorim is split up into, you can split it up into 3 sections. You have the first 2 maimorim, which were both said on Rosh Hashanah. Then you have the next 3 maimorim, one which was said on Shabbos Shuvah, one that was said on Sukkos, and one that was said on Shmini Atzeres. And then you have the last 3 maimorim, which are maimorim from Pashas Bereishis, Pashas Lech Lecha, and Pashas Vayera. There was a slight gap in between for Pashas Noach, and also for Simchas Torah, because that's when the maimer Hei Cholzu was said. So there was a break in the hemshekh whilst the Rebbe Rashab said the maimer Hei Cholzu, and he said it twice, Simchas Torah and Pashas Noach. Okay, so the plan is we're going to learn the first 2 maimorim, and the style we're going to learn it in is we're not going to rush it, but we're not going to delve too deeply into it. We're trying to just get the skeleton of what it's discussed in the first 2 maimorim, and then at that point we'll start discussing and analyzing the things that are being said. We just want to get a grip on what's being said more than why it's being said. Okay, so the questions we might be asking, we might ask a few questions that we'll put on hold to deal with later when we get to it. Okay, so let's jump straight in. This maimer was said on the second night of Rosh Hashanah of Ranat. So this would have been on the Motzei Shabbos, because Shabbos was the first day. That would have been the second night. In general, the Rebbeim wouldn't say maimorim on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, and be focused on the davening. Okay, Yom Tov Shel Rosh Hashanah shechal yis b'Shabbos b'mikdash hayu toikin avol lo b'medina. So the Mishnah at the beginning of Perek Dalet of Rosh Hashanah says that when Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos, then in the Beis HaMikdash they would still blow the shofar, but not in the rest of the country. Neither in Yerushalayim and neither in all of the other territories in Eretz Yisrael. So the Gemara goes on and explains the reason. The Rabbanon hu de Gozel beit k'derabba. It was a gezeira of the Rabbanon based on what Rabbah said. Because the Amar Rabbah had said, Hakol chayvim b'tkiyah shofar ve'in hakol b'kim b'tkiyah shofar. Everyone is obliged in the blowing of the shofar, but not everyone is expert in the blowing of the shofar. And therefore it's required to make a gezerah and say that you can't blow the shofar on Shabbos, because what might happen? Maybe the person will take in his hand the shofar and walk to somebody who's an expert in all the laws of blowing shofar in order to learn exactly all the laws and how exactly to blow it, or to check that the shofar is kosher or whatever it might be, and he'll end up carrying 4 amis in the public domain, which would be chilul Shabbos. So in a sense, this is a gezerah to prevent people from being mechal Shabbos when Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos. There's a fear, there's a chashash, there's a concern that people might be over on tiltul, they might transgress the prohibition of carrying on Shabbos.
But why is it that the people in the base of Mikdash might not?
Okay.
Why is that only their fear of? Surely if it's a fear for them, it should be a fear for
So,
everyone else as well.
the reason is, this is what's called a shavus. So this is an additional, there is a collection of laws on Shabbos that are rabbinic enactments to preserve the kedusha of Shabbos. So they're not isurim da'iraisa, but they're precautions put in to stop people transgressing. The rules of Shvus do not apply in the Beis HaMikdash. There is an assumption in the Beis HaMikdash who runs the show in the Beis HaMikdash, the Kehanim. The Kehanim are people who know the score, know exactly what you need to do, and they don't need extra restrictions to sort of like to protect them from transgressing the obligations of Shabbos. So the Mikdash was a place where there weren't anything that was considered a shvus, a general requirement for people to protect them, did not apply in the Beis HaMikdash. So since the whole reason why this that we don't blow the shofar when Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos is because we're worried about people who don't know what they're doing, then that doesn't apply in the Beis HaMikdash, because that's there they know what they're doing.
Okay.
Yep. The Rebbe says, seemingly this is extraordinary, very surprising. How can you push aside a positive commandment of the Torah because of a concern that maybe somebody might come to do something that is forbidden? Would you, just because of something which is a concern, a chashash, a suspicion it might happen, you're going to push off a clear requirement midoraisa? It seems it's completely imbalanced. You got something which is extremely important. There's a chiyuv to do it, and you say we're not going to do it because maybe something might go wrong. Ubifrat, and more than that, that would be by any mitzvah saseh deiraisa. It would seem strange that you would take a suffix, a doubtful suspicion that something might go wrong, and basically annul. Here he says the word yidche, you push aside. In other Maimarim it would say that you're mevatel. You basically you completely annul the existence of that mitzvah on that day. But when it comes to shofar, the question is even stronger. Ubifrat mitzvahs tekiyah shofar, especially when it comes to the mitzvah of blowing the shofar. She mitzvah rama v'nisa ma'od, which is an extraordinarily important mitzvah. Ukiyudua, like it is known. Bipnimius hakavana the mitzvahs tekiyah shofar. We know that what is the inner meaning behind the blowing of the shofar. Shu inyanat teshuvah is the idea of teshuvah. U'mitzvahs teshuvah hi lamayla mikol ha-mitzvahs. And the mitzvah of teshuvah is, if that is the fundamental kavanah, purpose, and intention of blowing the shofar is teshuvah, and teshuvah is greater than all other mitzvahs, to the extent that if a person would become blemished, God forbid, in their performance of the Torah mitzvahs, they wouldn't be Mekayim mitzvah say, or they would have been over and transgressed the mitzvahs leisese. Nothing stands in the way of teshuvah. They can use they can do teshuvah and shenimshach slichas aveinos chulim. They will be forgiven for their sins. They'll be able to draw down forgiveness through teshuvah. Zahari mitzvahs teshuvah, hila ma'ila mikol mitzvahs. That indicates that the mitzvah of teshuvah is greater than all the other mitzvahs. Because if it's able to rectify the non-performance or the transgression of those mitzvahs, that indicates that teshuvah must be greater than them. Yeah? And that is also the notion of the blowing of the shofar, because the blowing of the shofar is all about teshuvah, which will be discussed in the third Maimah a little bit more elaborately. And not just that. Every single aspect of the year, the upcoming year, is dependent on the blowing of the shofar. The blowing of the shofar is what elicits all of the blessings, hashpah, all the things the person requires in the upcoming year is determined by the blowing of the shofar. Hein hemshekh is ruchnius, that is both with regards to a person's spiritual endeavors in the upcoming year and learning Torah and doing mitzvahs. Hein hemshekh is gashmius, and also in their sustenance, in their physical human existence. Bechinas shefa chayas ba'ilmis, how a person is going to receive all of the divine blessings over the coming year. Everything is elicited through the blowing of the shofar, as is expounded upon in the Zohar and in the writings of the Arizal. So if the blowing of the shofar is so significant and so important, it seems extremely surprising. This Mishnah, and the explanation that the Gemara gives, how can you push off one of the most important mitzvah of the year because of a concern of somebody's lack of awareness of the laws of Shabbos, and their desire to fulfill the mitzvah of shofar in the correct way? They're going to end up being mechal Shabbos, and because of that, you're going to lose out on the whole mitzvah of shofar. What's going to happen to all the hemshechs for the year? What's going to happen for all of the slichas havonos? What's going to happen with all the impact that the shofar has? How can you just get rid of it like that? Even though in the Gemara over there, what does it say? This is not purely sort of just a rabbinic enactment because of this concern. It's not just because of the Gezeirah D'Rabba. There's more to it than that. Already in the Torah, there's a remes. There's a hint in the Torah that when Yontif of Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos, one shouldn't blow the shofar. From what it says in the pasuk in Pashas Emor, Zichrein Teruah. So sometimes it just talks about Yom Teruah. So in Pashas Pinchas, I think, it says the Lashon Yom Teruah. It's the day of blowing the shofar. Whereas in Pashas Emor, it says Zichrein Teruah. It's just a memorial or remembering of the blowing the shofar. So that is a sort of a hint already that there's a time on Rosh Hashanah when the shofar is not blown. It's just mentioned. It's just remembered. Hainu b'Shabbos just and that's a hint to on Shabbos when it just needs to be remembered. And that similarly is brought in the Midrash Rabbah and in the Talmud Yerushalmi. It seems to mean, it implies over there that the reason why you have the difference, or the reason why the shofar is not blown on Rosh Hashanah when it falls out on Shabbos, is because in any case there is a suffix whether it is Rosh Hashanah, because of the establishing the days of the month based on the moon. It's possible that, especially Rosh Hashanah is always a difficult time because it's the beginning of the month. When it comes to the other Yom Tovim, which are in the middle of the month, there's time to establish what's going on. But there's a degree of doubt about Rosh Hashanah. So, there's a possibility there's going to be a Chil Shabbos, and it's already doubtful whether the shofar needs to be blown on this day anyway. So we can push it aside on that basis. As he says, and that's why in the Beis HaMikdash, nevertheless, they would still blow. Why? He says more of a ruchnistic reason. Because in the Beis HaMikdash, it's like the earthly representation of the Malchus Derekiev, of Hashem's, of the Maila. And there's no question that it's Rosh Hashanah. It's only in the earthly realm where we have a doubt. In the Mikdash, they have a certainty. But in the rest of the place, there's a certain doubt. And that's why that's the suggestion it gives over there in the Gemara Yerushalmi. Yu'un Sham Yerushalmi, Yafamara Sham. In the commentaries of the Yafamara Sham. And this explains the question of the Gemara that we have in the Bavli. If it's Midai Raisa, how can you blow in? How is it possible that in the Beis HaMikdash they would blow? So that's the question asked in the Bavli. So based on the beer in the Yerushalmi, you could come to some type of answer. But again, this is in the brackets, and this is not. And he's just trying to give all of the, and you'll find there's a lot of Maimorim with this Dibra Maschil. If you want to go through the whole history of this Dibra Maschil, of this starting of Maimon, you have a whole range of how this question's asked. You have in Toshin Gimel, you have it in Samach Vov, you have it all over the place. Omnam be'emes le'kaima came. Kaimelon came. We don't accept this answer of the Yerushalmi, which would suggest that there isn't really such a strong obligation midday raisa to blow the shofar when Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos, and that's why it's easier to push it aside. Rather, the midday raisa mitzvah litzkei b'shofar gam b'Rosh Hashanah shechal b'Shabbos af medina. The truth is that midday raisa, everyone has a chiyuv to blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, whether it's in the weekday or it's on Shabbos. No difference. The chiyuv is still there midday raisa, and it's rak mishum gezeir de rabba nitzchot ki shofar. And it's the Gezeira of Rabbah which is preventing us from fulfilling that mitzvah de'iraisa. And that is, if you look in the Masechta Seifrim is a sort of a Masechta that is not part of the Shas, probably written a bit later, time of the Go'inim, and there it just. It makes it clear, just like we're saying here, that Tekiyah Shofar, the obligation to blow the shofar, is not actually pushed aside because of this gezerah. It stands. You have an obligation to blow the shofar, and you have a gezerah that means you can't fulfill your obligation, and therefore the question still stands. If that is the pshat, you have an obligation midoraisa, and the gezerah is there to prevent you doing so. In fact, the Rebbe, the Zeyipala, this is astonishing. How does the gezerah of Rabbah take precedence over a mitzvah sasei deiraisa?
Why don't they make it a thing that everyone just has to go to the Beis Midrash?
It's not so easy necessarily for everyone to do that. There's no chiyuv.
They did it for Shlosh Regalim.
Right, there's a chiyuv to do so. There's no chiyuv aliyah l'regel or aliyah l'Rosh Hashanah. And still, so someone can't. What do? Are they obliged to blow the shofar? They're not obliged to blow the shofar. Maybe there were people that would dafka go to the Beis HaMikdash to do that.
So, when did the Beis HaMikdash were the people in the Beis HaMikdash were the first people to hear what the days of the month were? Yeah. And when would they send emissaries?
They always fixed Rosh Hashanah that it was.
Okay, but would they usually have emissaries coming back in time for Rosh Hashanah?
No.
So when did the emissaries go?
After.
So they go on Gimel.
Yeah.
And would they blow so they would always decide in the Beis Mikdash what day Rosh Hashanah was?
they would always try and they would make sure that the. Come on.
Actually, says your name. So. Shake it.
They would always make sure that the month of Elul would be 29 days. So this is a sort of was an addition to the main structure, the hemshekh, that was done in honor of the fact that that year Rosh Hashanah was on Shabbos. But I say it's not going to be. These are questions that are dealt with in other Maimorim. Sometimes they're answered, sometimes they're not. Here they won't be answered, and it won't be a focus. What you're going to find in the upcoming Maimorim, you're similarly going to what would happen to Rabbi Shabbos before he would say the Maimon. He would write sort of an intro and an ending. Sometimes just an intro, sometimes with an ending. So, for example, the next Maim Yechinam Yumayim has an intro, but it doesn't. The questions or the discussion doesn't get answered at the end. The next one, Shavuot Yisrael, does get answered. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Lullaby Rava doesn't. Yemash Miniat Seres does. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. These sort of Dibra Maskos, the intro, the introductory part, was referred to as like a passport. This is sort of the entry point into the Maimon, but they're not the Maimon itself. And definitely here, the Rebbe Rashab is not concerned to answer these questions. So now's the second introduction, which is the introduction that you'll find in the Maimon of the Tzemach Tzedek, and some of this is, cutting and pasting quite word for word. You'll see compared to the Maimon in Oyer Torah. So lahavin zeh. So to understand all of this, what we've just said above, first of all, we need to understand the whole concept of Rosh Hashanah. The Rosh Hashanah is on the 6th day of creation. You have the machlekes, whether the world was created in Elul or other, really. It's like for Nisan, so Rosh Hashanah would be Rosh Chodesh Nisan or Rosh Chodesh Tishrei, and if the world is created in Chafei Elul, then Tishrei, first day of Tishrei, is the 6th day of creation, and that was when Adam HaRishon was created. Yeah. So there's a connection between the creation of man and the day of Rosh Hashanah. So the question is, what have they got to do with each other? Why does the creation of man, why do we establish that Rosh Hashanah should be Dafka on the day when Adam HaRishon was created? And why don't we have Rosh Hashanah on the 25th of Elul, which was the first day of creation? Yeah? Why would you think Rosh Hashanah would be more appropriate to be on the day of the creation of the world and not on the day of creation of humanity?
Just ahead of the year.
Because we are man and we are celebrating the creation, but we're also celebrating the creation of ourselves.
You're not in my question. The question here in the Maimon is, why is Rosh Hashanah on the 6th day of creation when man was created and not on the first day of creation on Chafei Elul? So that the assumption there is that it would be more appropriate for it to be on the first day of creation and not on the day that man was created. So what is the assumption of the question?
That Rosh Hashanah is all about Beis Elam. Is that's when Hashem became a Melech.
But maybe he didn't. Maybe he only became a
But it's
Melech
also
when
the
man was
Rosh
created.
He only
Rosh
became
Hashanah,
a
no?
melech when he had people to rule. You're not a king without people to rule. Nobody is a prime minister of a country with no people in it. He only really became a melech when he had people to serve him.
Okay. So what is the assumption? We can all come up with answers. The question is, what is the assumption of the question?
Rosh Hashanah signifies the idea of us receiving our Shabbat all year round. It's like a general day which includes everything else. And so to the beginning of B'riyas Olam, which this was the first day, which includes Shema light and dark, is like a general beginning, which includes everything of sorts.
I mean, you could just easily say that it makes sense to wait till everything's created.
That's all, yeah.
Okay, let's park that. Just think that it's a question, but what is the assumption of that question?
So what is the assumption of the question?
It's a question. What is the assumption of the question? We also need to understand the Torah itself does not elaborate on Rosh Hashanah being this significant day, a day of judgment, when we're all judged and we receive, hopefully, a good psak din at the end of it. The Torah is just very... It doesn't tell us any details about Rosh Hashanah. All it says is on the 7th month, on the first day of the month, it should be a holy time. You should call it holy. Then it's only once you see in the Mishnah that we're told that the first day of Tishri is the Rosh Hashanah for years. Shabayu adin umishpat, in which we have a judgment. Midichsiv, based on what it says in the pasuk, Eini Hashem Elokecha bo mereishis Hashana v'ad achris shana. So the pasuk says the eyes of Hashem are on it. The eyes of the Lord your God are on it from the beginning of the year until the end of the year. Mereishis Hashana nidain ma sheyeh b'seifa. That's what it says in the Gemara Rosh Hashanah, that the meaning of that pasuk is that at the beginning of the year he judges what's going to happen at the end of it. And it also says in the pasuk Tiku b'chida shofar. This is in Tehillim. You should blow in the month of the shofar. Ki chayk hu li Yisrael u'mishpat chuli l'Yaakov. Yeah, that it's a chayk, it's a law for Yisrael, and it's a mishpat, and it's a judgment for Yaakov. K'di isa b'Gemara perikama de Rosh Hashanah daf ches seif amud aleph. So you have sort of references, a hint in a Tehillim. It's mainly you have a hint in this pasuk from Akev, but these are all limudim that you have in Torah Shabbat Peh. In Torah Shabbat, when it talks about all the Yom Tovim, Pesach it tells us why, because that's when we took out of Mitzrayim. Sukkot, we know why we celebrate Sukkot. Shavuos is a bit more complicated. It doesn't really say as clearly any connection with Matan Torah. But Rosh Hashanah, as a day of judgment, is not expressed in the Torah. So the first question was, why is Rosh Hashanah on the 6th day of creation when man was created, not on the first day of creation when the world was created? The second question is, why does the Torah not explicitly explain that Rosh Hashanah is a day of judgment and tell us anything about that? Why does it rely on Torah Shabbat Peh to express that? Okay, again, these are questions. The first question is something that will be dealt with. The second question is not talked about. So, but the first question becomes, it doesn't get answered directly, but it gets answered indirectly in the discussion we're going to have. Okay, now after those two introductions, we can get into the real introduction. The real introduction is going to be two midrashim about B'riyas Ha'olam, it's about the creation of the world. They go like this: Ulahavin kol zeh, and to understand all of this, yesh lahaktim techila, we need to first introduce Masha Amur Razal b'Medrash Rabbah, what Razal say in the Midrash. There it says, B'tchila ala b'machshava livrei ha'olam b'midas hadin. At the outset of creation, what rose up in the mind and the intention of Hashem was to create the world with his attribute, his measure of judgment. Or maybe not judgment, with his measure of justice. We'll talk maybe in another time about the difference, especially when we get into the second part of the hemshekh, Maimah 3, 4, and 5, where these things are discussed. What would be the difference in meaning if we called it judgment or whether we called it justice? But not for now. So where is it indicated that Hashem wished to create the world with din? Let's just use the Hebrew for the moment, with din. B'hu masha kosuv, because that's what it says in the first pasuk in the Torah, Bereshis bara Elikim, that at the beginning of Elikim's creation, uses the name of Hashem Elikim. Asher Shem Elikim hu midas hadin, and the names of Hashem, which indicate the two different midas of Hashem. So Hashem has a midas hadin, has a measure, an attribute or a measure of din, and he also has a measure of rachamim. So these are two forces. These are two forces which Hashem has, and when it came to creating the world, he thought, I will use my powers, the power that I have for din. That is how the world is going to be constructed, using din. And the name Elikim is a reference to that, whereas the name Yud Kei Vav Kei, Shem Havaya, is a reference to Hashem's quality of rachamim. So the Midrash says, from the fact that the Torah starts Bereshis Bar Elikim, indicates that was the initial intention of creating the world with this Midas Hadin. But there was a problem. When he saw that the world was unable to sustain itself purely as a product of God's Midas Hadin, what he did is he mixed together, he partnered with it Midas Harachmin, his attribute of mercy. And that's what it says in the pasuk in Perik Daled, in Perik Beis, pasuk Daled. Eila Teidos Chulu B'Yom Aseis Havaya Elikim Eretz V'Shamayim. At what seems like a repeating of the creation story, which many people are concerned about how the creation of the world is described in Perik Aleph, and then again repeats the creation in a slightly different order. So here, according to this Midrash, the pshat is like this: the whole story of creation that we find in Perik Aleph of Sefer Bereshis is b'machshava. That's how Hashem intended to create the world. He imagined the world being created that way. And then he saw that it's not feasible. The world would not be able to maintain itself. So he instead created it together with Midas Harachmim. And that's what's described in Perik Beis, as we see, because it mentions the name Havaya and Elikim by the creation. So Niske Shem Havaya Shehu Midas Harachmim. It's mentioned the name of Havaya, which, as we said before, is the attribute of mercy. Okay? That's the Midrash. Now, this Midrash is quoted in the way this Midrash is worded. It fits mostly with the way it's worded in Tanya, in Perik the beginning in Daled Hey. This is the way the Midrash has many different. This Midrash has many different versions. You have it in Rashi as well, right at the beginning, in a slightly different seder. When we learn more Be'iyun, when we go over this again, I have a lot to say about this Midrash, about how it's represented, but not for now. So that's the Midrash. The Tzarich Lahavin. So we need to understand, what is the story behind this Midrash? What on earth is going on? Isn't Hashem supposed to be the source of all goodness and kindness? Why, when he was thinking about creating the world, do you think, you know what, I'm going to do it with din, I'm going to do it with judgment, it's going to be a strict, I'm going to be very strict. Doesn't fit in with the what we assume the Abish is supposed to be the source of all goodness and kindness. Well, it's not a very kind way to create a world. And it's only Elo Lefisha Rosh Ein El Miskayim. It's just it's not going to work. Shitavim Midas Arachim. He then mixed in the Midas Arachim. But ideally, he would have preferred to create the world in Midas Adin. What was Hashem thinking? Where does that come from? What is the meaning of that? Surely, somebody who's the nature of someone who's good is to do good, is to be good. That should be a natural thing. You would have thought that create a world, make it with kindness, do it with mercy, be gentle. Yeah. So that's question number one. And he elaborates on this question, ubifrat, and especially, surely, if you think about why on earth did Hashem create the world in the first place, it would make more sense for him to, based on the reason why he created the world, to have created it with rachamim. It says in the Eitz Chaim, at the beginning of Shah Klolim, that when it arose in his will to create the world, and it says there clearly, to perform kindness with his creations. Because it's the nature of someone who's good to perform goodness. And he wished to be kind. Like he explains in other places too. So that's the question. Based on that Midrash. And what it's going to do is going to set us up, which we're really going to go into this question at the in the next section, the beginning of Maimah 3. This is not going to be discussed until the beginning of Maimah 3. This Midrash is going to come back more into play in Maimah 3. The main focus of this Maimah and the next one is going to be the second Midrash that we're going to bring now. The idea is as follows. The Midrash Rabbi Bereishis say Perek Yud Beis Ama Moshel Hazeh. In the Midrash, in that Midrash Rabbi, it brings a moshel to explain. There's a second Midrash, which is a moshel to explain this first Midrash we just quoted. The Melech Shahaya Loi Kaises Dakim Keinu Hagirsa Ba'aruch. It was a king who had fragile glasses, or cups, or vessels, kaises. Amar Melech, the king said, Imani Neisen Neseichen Chamin Hemisbakin. The king said, if I place inside these fragile goblets, these cups, hot water, then they will crack. Yeah, they're too fragile for hot water. Because of their thinness and their fragility, they aren't able to receive the intense heat of the water. They will smash immediately. And if I put into them cold water, they will congeal. The word makrisin here is from the terminology where you say wine that congeals. Sometimes you get a layer of something that forms on the top. You'll see. Pirush nasa of a korush. The meaning of the congealing is it becomes thick and on the surface. And that's what it means that the cold water would make them congeal. What will happen if you put very cold water into them, it will, like on the outside, it gets cold. You know when you put cold water in something, the outside it will start getting wet, and it will create a thickness and a dirtiness to the cup. They'll become dirty. That's the sense. So that was his dilemma. He has these cups. He can't put hot water in. He can't put cold water in. So because they're fragile. These cups are fragile. So so what does the king do? He mixed the hot and the cold water so they should become just lukewarm. And then the glasses were able to be maintained. Kach Amar Kodesh Baruch Hu. So too says Hashem. If I create the world with rachamim, if I'm just extremely kind and merciful, then the sinners will be plentiful, abundant. There'll be lots of sins or sinners, because no one's going to be scared of the punishment. But if I create the Midas Hadin, how can the world survive with my strictness and my exactitude? What I'll do is I'll create it with both. I'll mix it together. And hopefully they'll be able to maintain themselves. That's the end of the Midrash. Now, just a few quick questions. This Midrash, this Midrash, does it match the thing that's being a mashal on?
The king fits.
Okay.
Cups. The world can be a cup, potentially.
So the world is the cup.
It still doesn't answer why Hashem wanted to create the world harshly in the first place.
Right,
but it also doesn't fit in
agreed.
the way that...
That was the question on the first one, and it's not... You're right, it doesn't do that.
But that question brings up the narrative. The narrative is that Hashem wanted to make it in one way, and he had no other choice but do it another way. Over here we're saying he had he wanted to do it, he had two options, and then he put them together. So it doesn't match up.
That's correct. Look at the order. When it says...
Also does the Mitzrachim.
Kachama Kodesh Baruch Hu. Im Boiranim said the Midas Harachamim. It says Rachamim before Din.
And it mentioned both of them.
Yeah.
It's like Hashem was passive to both sides.
So it's not identical. So for this you have to also appreciate that a mashal is not just trying to say the same thing as the nimshal. Sometimes extending the original thing. Again, something we'll talk about when we learn more Be'iyun. But for the purposes going forward, we're now going to be focused on this second Midrash. And specifically, we're going to be focused on the idea of the kos. We're concerned here about what is the moshel of the kos. That's what interests us. What time are we?
Hi.
Hello.
7:50.
Do you want to stop here? We've done 15 minutes. Shall we?
Yeah.
Hi.
It's a healthy place to stop.
Hello.
Hello.
Talk.
Hi.
Yeah.